1944, the late summer. The air was thick with the scent of inevitable Allied victory. The liberation of Paris had signaled to the High Command that the German collapse was imminent. Many believed the war would conclude by Christmas. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was driven by this intoxicating optimism. He issued a directive on September 5th that would irrevocably alter the timeline of the war. His strategy was audacious and direct. He would prioritize a rapid, decisive thrust toward the industrial heartland of the Ruhr. This meant pushing directly into Germany's final border defenses. These defenses were known as the Westwall or the Siegfried Line. The attack would focus north and south of the city of Aachen. This decision was predicated on the belief that German resistance was brittle. It set the stage for an unexpectedly brutal confrontation. The German High Command faced the disintegration of its front lines. They knew the Westwall was not the impenetrable barrier that Hitler claimed. General-Lieutenant Friedrich August Schack, commanding the 81st Corps, confirmed this reality. He observed that many of the antiquated pillboxes were waterlogged. They lacked equipment and were functionally neglected. Yet, the German strategy was not one of holding territory. It was a strategy of attrition. These concrete structures were partially buried. Their walls featured thickness ranging from 4 to 8 feet. They were designed to create interlocking fields of fire. The sole purpose was to delay the enemy. The Germans intended to bleed the Allies white until reserves could be mobilized for counterattack. As the Allied spearheads approached, the city of Aachen descended into chaos. Aachen was intended by the Allies merely as a secondary objective. Hitler had mandated a civilian evacuation. This order was amplified by the inflammatory rhetoric of Gauleiter Joseph Grohe. The result was widespread panic among the population. General-Lieutenant Schack watched the turmoil firsthand. He observed bewildered civilians reduced to aimless flight. They were begging desperately for help in the streets. Fear of being branded a traitor drove thousands from their homes. This fear was coupled with the terror of approaching combat. September 12, 1944, Allied expectations of a quick, clean breakthrough were instantly shattered. Task Force Lovelady advanced into the town of Rötgen. They were momentarily fooled by white sheets signaling surrender. But after reaching the blown Schlierbach Bridge, intense concealed fire pinned them down. Similar lethal encounters unfolded everywhere. American units probed the line. Task Force King found numerous camouflaged telemines. They encountered formidable dragon's teeth and steel gates. Heavily armed pillboxes dotted the landscape in the Rainer woods. The Westwall defenses were proving lethal. The American 7th Corps had planned to bypass Aachen entirely. Instead, they were forced into an immediate, grinding halt. Despite the shock, a significant breakthrough was achieved that same day. The American 1st Infantry Division, under Major General Clarence R. Hubner, led the charge. This was not a swift motorized advance. It was a feat of pure, arduous human labor and courage. The engineers, like Lieutenant George E. Conley and Lieutenant George E. Eales, worked with fierce determination. They raced against constant enemy fire to clear the obstacles. Using powerful TNT charges, they blasted gaps through the formidable dragon's teeth. They also cleared the heavy steel gates. Companies E, D, and I of the 36th Armored Infantry pushed through the breached line. They were supported by the 23rd Armored Engineer Battalion. That marked the first time Allied troops had set foot within the Reich's final frontier. The human cost of the penetration was immediate. Lieutenant Richard S. Burroughs died near Rötgen. Lieutenant A.P. Hall met his demise from sniper fire. His losses underscored the lethal effectiveness of the compromised German defenses. Even the German command structure was fracturing under the personal stress of the battle. General-Lieutenant Count Gerhard Graf von Schwerin had just assumed command of Aachen's defenses. He was profoundly affected by the civilian plight he witnessed. Witnessing the panic and suffering, he made a decision of conscience, and this decision flew directly in the face of Nazi dogma. He wrote a direct humanitarian note to the American commander. He stated his intention to halt the chaotic evacuation. He asked for immediate relief for the desperate population. This act of moral defiance contrasted starkly with the Nazi hold-at-all-costs orders. It highlighted the internal disarray within the German leadership. It soon led to his immediate relief from command. Even as the concrete pillboxes held firm, the German will to wage a fanatical defense was faltering from within. The expected quick victory had devolved overnight into a grinding siege. This struggle altered the timetable for the war's end well beyond Christmas 1944. The initial penetration of the Westwall was achieved through heroic and costly efforts, but the strategic goal of a rapid thrust into the Ruhr remained elusive. The battle immediately transitioned into a grinding war of attrition. Every tactical gain was now measured in blood and shattered equipment. Task Force Lovelady, which had started with the false promise of surrender, suffered devastating consequences. This occurred near the town of Mausbach, September 15th. After navigating the difficult terrain and overcoming a blown bridge, their 8-mile-long column was vulnerable. They were caught completely unprepared by an intense enemy ambush as they entered the town. Despite severe fuel shortages, German forces had redeployed anti-tank guns from other sectors. They turned the streets of Mausbach into a killing zone. In the ensuing chaos, Lovelady lost 7 tanks. They also lost 1 tank destroyer and a vital ambulance. This forced a costly withdrawal and a tactical regrouping. The entire axis of the attack had to be shifted. Task Force Dohn faced similar devastation. They were attempting to push through the Schill Line. They encountered a murderous enemy artillery concentration in the draw south of Verschied. Their engineers achieved initial critical success. Sergeant Sverre Wiggy Dahl and his crew heroically freed a flail tank stuck in the dragon's teeth under fire. But the momentum quickly dissolved. 7 of Dohn's tanks were set ablaze by the enemy concentration. This forced a painful withdrawal. Lieutenant Colonel Dohn was disgusted at the necessity of leaving his engaged forces behind. He desperately tried to bolster the morale of the remaining tank crews. But the stark reality remained undeniable. The German defences, even when manned by depleted or inferior units, were proving resilient and lethal. The strategic stalemate was most pronounced around the Verlautenheid Plateau. This vital ridge was quickly seized by Captain Dawson's Company G. That was on September 16th. The ridge became immediately known as Dawson's Ridge. Its capture was crucial because it controlled the approaches to Aachen. Yet the victory was instantly contested by German counterattacks. Fresh troops from Oberst Engel's 12th Infantry Division recognized the plateau's strategic value. They committed themselves fiercely to its defense, blunting the American momentum, and fighting devolved into a prolonged attritional slugfest. On September 17th alone, the area experienced an estimated 4,000 mortar rounds. It also absorbed 4,000 artillery shells. The battlefield was a scene of chaos filled with the constant whistle of incoming ordnance. The German forces utilized the Westwall's interlocking fields of fire and fortified towns. They effectively halted the immediate envelopment of Aachen. This prolonged and costly struggle confirmed a painful truth for the Allies. Standard infantry and armoured tactics were insufficient against the concrete and steel of the Westwall. These tactics had been successful in the open fields of France. Now, the imperative for specialized tactics grew urgent. The capture of German pillboxes required infantry, demolition experts, and flamethrowers. These units had to work in close concert. They needed to bypass the frontal armor of the bunkers. The goal was to destroy them from the rear or through their embrasures. As the 7th Corps ground to a halt around Aachen, the strategic focus shifted north. It moved to the 19th Corps sector. There, a massive frontal assault on the West Wall and the Worm River was meticulously planned. Colonel Edwin M. Sutherland's 119th Infantry Regiment began specialized training. They emphasized speed and the use of new equipment. Flamethrowers and bazookas became essential skills. This specialized training was critical given the high turnover of experienced personnel. Planning for the Worm River crossing was exceptionally detailed. D-Day was set for October 2nd. Officers worked night after night over a large sand table model. This allowed soldiers to visualize their mission with remarkable clarity. Colonel Frankland emphasized speed. He motivated his men with a promise. He told them, "If we crack this line, we'll be home by Christmas." A critical piece of intelligence was delivered by Lieutenant Robert F. Cushman. He led a 4-man patrol from the 117th Infantry Regiment. On the night of September 22nd, they crawled through broken china strung along the approach. They successfully identified a viable crossing point on the Worm. This saved the need for vulnerable assault boats. Colonel Sutherland made a critical decision regarding the attack formation. He opted to attack with 2 battalions abreast rather than 1. This aimed to better coordinate the assault. The artillery preparation began on September 26th. Initial bombardments, however, proved disappointing. The 105mm howitzers lacked the necessary velocity and weight to destroy the hardened pillboxes. They often only stripped away camouflage. Even the more effective 155mm self-propelled guns struggled. These guns fired concrete-penetrating shells. They required a dozen direct hits just to remove 4 feet of concrete. The airstrike at 0900 hours on October 2nd caught the German commanders completely by surprise. The infantry H-hour was set for 1100. General Cochling of LXXX-1 Corps later described the action as a completely surprising action. The American infantry advanced across open beet fields towards the river. They immediately encountered intense small arms and machine gun fire. This fire often came from positions camouflaged within the wet green foliage. As Captain Hopp's Company E pushed toward the worm, logistical failures immediately hampered the advance. Lieutenant Colonel Duncan's 743rd Tank Battalion was tasked with providing crucial armoured support. Their vehicles became mired in the deep silt and mud. By 6:00 p.m., the tanks were still hopelessly stuck. Their immobility ironically drew German artillery and mortar fire onto the exposed infantry. At the Worm River itself, the crossing became a chaotic, desperate act of individual heroism. The river was swollen, and the bridge planks were destroyed. Lieutenant Fay M. Parker, a mortar platoon leader, found the disorganized 1st Platoon pinned down by German small arms fire. It was here that Sergeants Lewis A. Reeves and James W. Harris acted without orders. They plunged into the chest-deep freezing water. They physically steadied the precarious bridge planks. They held them firm against the current and the constant enemy fire. This allowed the rest of Company E to scramble across. They established a tenuous foothold on the German side. Meanwhile, Company C suffered a devastating ordeal in a canalized draw. Enemy artillery, already zeroed in on the position, unleashed a torrent of fire. This fire nearly annihilated the unit. Lieutenant Stanley reported that almost the entire platoon was wiped out in a few minutes. 6 men were killed and 58 were wounded. Despite the chaos and the mounting casualties, the infantry pressed the attack against the concrete line. Captain Spiker's Company B executed a rapid and successful assault. They crossed the Worm by noon. Lieutenant Borton, leading his men, defied the danger with a shout. He yelled, "There's your goddamned bridge!" Within 2 hours, they had reduced 5 pillboxes. Private Brent Younes wielded a flamethrower against an embrasure. Private James W. Jenkins followed with a pole charge. After Jenkins fired 3 shots, followed by 2 more, the pillbox exploded. The intense close-quarters combat confirmed American tactical proficiency in reducing these concrete bunkers. By the end of the day, Company B alone had captured 7 pillboxes. The struggle continued into the night. The capture of key fortifications marked a significant breach. These fortifications included Pillbox 8 and the formidable Rimberg Castle. The castle provided vital observation points. The fighting within the castle was described as a desperate hand-to-hand struggle. It was reminiscent of medieval warfare, yet the logistical failures persisted. Major Sterber's engineers completed a 45-foot treadway bridge by 15:55 hours. The ground, however, was too soft. 3 tanks from the 743rd Tank Battalion were mired on the muddy east bank by 17:15 hours. This prevented the full commitment of armoured and mechanized units. These units could have exploited the initial, surprising penetration. The costly victory resulted in 315 American casualties on October 2nd. It had cracked the Westwall. The price of every yard was paid in blood. Men like Private First Class Harold G. Kinner underscored the grinding, attritional reality of the war on German soil. Kinner sacrificed his life to save his comrades from a grenade. The initial breach of the West Wall along the Worm River on October 2nd had been achieved. Victory, however, was far from secured. The German command was surprised, but reacted instantly. It committed engineers and panzer units to contain the American bridgehead. October 3rd dawned hazy, overcast, and wet. This weather offered perfect cover for German reinforcements. Colonel Johnson's 117th Infantry Regiment faced a grinding slugfest for Übach. The fighting devolved into house-to-house combat. The enemy gave ground only inch by inch. American forces, particularly the 2nd Armored Division's Combat Command B, surged into the confined bridgehead. This unit was codenamed Powerhouse. Their surge created immediate, paralyzing congestion. Colonel Johnson watched, frustrated, as Powerhouse ran into the rear of the 3rd Battalion and was stopped cold. Major Wayne later criticized the task force's tanks as timid. They were immobilized by the omnipresent fear of concealed German anti-tank weapons. Commanders' tempers flared as the momentum dissolved into a traffic jam of men and machines. The battlefield remained lethally unpredictable. Near Rimberg Castle, Captain Reich was studying a map with Lieutenant Arn. A German soldier appeared 200 yards away. Reich, an expert marksman, raised his Springfield rifle. He dropped the man with a single shot. Moments later, an artillery shell landed directly on Reich's command post. It killed him instantly. The human cost was evident across the front. Private Joseph P. Mehelich, a medic, was wounded twice while working under fire. Company F was reduced to 16 men by day's end. Amidst the chaos, moments of extraordinary individual courage proved decisive. In Neubach, Lieutenant Robert C. Burke, a forward observer, moved fearlessly through the concentrated fire, established an observation post, despite a German tank firing directly at his position. His timely direction of artillery fire turned a critical German counterattack on Company L into a decisive defeat. These saved the company from being overrun. Then came an intelligence coup. Captured German map entries revealed their strategic objective. It was not merely to defend the Westwall. The Germans intended to encircle Aachen, cutting off the 7th Corps from the north. This intelligence prompted an immediate shift in American strategy. The focus pivoted to Alsdorf. This was a key town whose capture would both counter the German encirclement threat and create a significant breach in the West Wall in 1988. By October 7th, the American advance, characterized by Lieutenant Thompson's rapid movement, caught German soldiers sleeping. Alsdorf, unsettlingly quiet, fell quickly. It was a ghost town upon entry. The line was cracked wide open. The task of isolating Aachen, however, was incomplete. To seal the encirclement, General Hedner ordered a multi-phase attack. This attack targeted the crucial high ground south of the city, as these objectives included Verlotenheide, Crucifix Hill, which was designated Hill 239, and Ravensburg Hill, or Hill 192. The German defense was manned by the 246th Division. This was a patchwork unit of naval personnel, physical misfits, deferred defense workers, and new recruits. It was nonetheless formidable. The division was led by skilled veterans, entrenched in deep concrete fortifications. The methodical attack began on October 8th. It opened with a massive artillery barrage on Verlotenheide. The fighting here was brutal street brawling. The American advance was hampered by armor crippled by mines and overwhelming German artillery. The true test, however, lay on Crucifix Hill. This ridge was the linchpin of the entire German defense. It was crowned by a massive pillbox housing 45 men. AJ's fortification also contained an 88mm gun and interlocking machine guns. The ridge literally shook from the impact of American shells. Captain Bobby E. Brown, commanding Company C of the 1st Battalion, 18th Infantry, knew a frontal assault would be suicide. He personally reconnoitred the formidable defenses. Brown then made a solitary, impossible decision. "I guess I'll just have to take them myself," he declared. He refused to ask his men to commit to a mission that would certainly cost their lives. Armed only with his rifle, an SCR 536 radio, and satchel charges, Brown began his personal war against the hill that approached the first pillbox. He pulled the fuse on a satchel charge, tossed it inside the embrasure, and slammed the steel door shut. They jumped back as the concrete structure bucked and exploded. Brown repeated the action, eliminating successive German positions. His extraordinary personal bravery transformed the battle. It secured the critical northern flank of the encirclement. The German response was immediate and ferocious. Shortly after 4:00 a.m. on October 9th, German shelling ceased. A massive counterattack then surged up the slopes of Crucifix Hill. Captain Brown ordered his men to hold their fire until the enemy was almost upon them. As the Germans were silhouetted by flares, the American heavy machine guns unleashed murderous grazing fires. Lieutenant Thomas Yarbour's gunners contributed significantly to the defense. Huns dropped like flies, Yarbour recounted. He estimated 50 German dead lay within 75 yards of their positions. The counterattack was repulsed. The victory, however, was costly, and 5 enlisted men were killed on Crucifix Hill, a testament to the tenacity of the German defense. With Crucifix Hill secured, the final piece of the encirclement was Ravelsberg Hill. On the night of October 9th, Captain Miller led Company B in a stealthy, dark infiltration. The men relied only on compass and memory to navigate the treacherous terrain. By the next morning, the fortifications were cleared. American forces then had a clear line of sight over the key supply route into Aachen, isolating the city further. Facing total encirclement, German command hardened its resolve. Oberst Gerhard Wilk was appointed commandant. He was sworn to hold the city at all costs. On the morning of October 10th, the Americans issued a formal surrender ultimatum. Lieutenant William Boehm, an interpreter, and Lieutenant Cedric A. Lafley embarked on the tense mission. They were accompanied by Private First Class Kenneth Kading, who carried a bedsheet as a white flag. They were blindfolded and escorted to Oberstleutnant Leher. Leher relayed the ultimatum to Wilk at his command post in the Palast Hotel Quellenhof lobby. The message presented a stark choice: surrender or face annihilation. The ultimatum trio returned by noon, having delivered the message that sealed the city's fate. Wilk, bound by Hitler's fanatical orders, refused the terms. The rejection of the ultimatum signaled the end of the encirclement phase and the beginning of the final, brutal siege. The Americans prepared for the next stage of urban warfare. This involved a massive, coordinated air and artillery bombardment. 300 fighter bombers and 12 artillery battalions were ready to fire 4,800 rounds. They were prepared to blast the way into the city of Aachen. The strategic imperative to close the Aachen Gap became the final, bloody precondition for the city's fall. For days, the American 19th and 7th Corps had struggled to link up. Their lines were separated by a narrow, contested zone around Vorselin and Kohlscheid. General Corlett and General Hodges, the highest commanders in the sector, exerted immense pressure. They pushed Major General Leland S. Hobbs, commander of the 30th Infantry Division, to achieve the objective. Elite German units, including the 116th Panzer Division, were present in force. Hobbs also faced the tactical dilemma of defending his own exposed left flank. He was nevertheless forced to initiate the broad offensive to seal the breach. The fighting that followed, particularly around the crucial Highway 57, was characterized by brutal, attritional combat. It took place in deep, cold, stinking mud. Soldiers were utterly exhausted, often going 24 hours without food. Their misery was compounded by constant shelling. Communication wires were perpetually down, leaving runners like Lieutenant Knox busy relaying critical information through the chaos. The offensive to close the gap was launched by Lieutenant Colonel Hassenfeld on October 16th. After midnight, reconnaissance squads stealthily crossed the Worm River. By 5:00 a.m., nearly 1,000 American soldiers began fording the river. Lieutenant Colonel Cox's 2nd Battalion jumped off at 6:00 a.m. The advance aimed to cut the highway, not push directly through the heavily defended town of Vorselin. The German counterattacks were relentless. Around the Burke Crossroads, Captain McCullough's battalion held off successive waves. They managed to disable 14 enemy tanks. Sergeant Melvin Haber distinguished himself during this fighting. He disabled German armor with a fierce tenacity that seemed impossible in the mud and rain. Further north, Captain Simmons' Company A, 119th Infantry, sustained 48 casualties, including its captain. The company was pinned down by machine gun fire. Their situation was only alleviated by massed artillery fire. This fire was directed by Captain Michael S. Buschlass, a liaison officer. He made a solo ascent to an artillery observation post under fire, saving the company from annihilation. In Badenburg, Staff Sergeant Jack J. Pendleton, leading a squad, found their advance stalled by a German machine gun nest. Pendleton realized the critical need to maintain momentum. He advanced alone under a hail of fire. He neutralized the nest, sacrificing his own life in the process. This act of heroism allowed his unit to move forward. It helped dismantle the German defenses in that sector. Finally, after 8 days of grinding combat, the strategic victory was achieved. American patrols, persevering under heavy fire, successfully linked the corps. Private Evan F. Whitis, and Private First Class Edward Krauss, scouts from the 30th Division, made contact. They met Staff Sergeant Chastin of the 1st Division. This confirmed the gap was closed. Aachen was now isolated, surrounded by a determined American ring. With the encirclement complete, the battle shifted entirely within the walls. The city was already reduced to gaunt skeletons by previous shelling and the recent massive air and artillery barrages. It became the stage for a new, terrifying form of warfare. American tactics, adapted specifically for the dense, fortified urban environment, came into play. Commanders utilized the measles system. This system involved numbering street intersections and key buildings for rapid, accurate targeting and reporting. Infantry and armor coordination was meticulously planned. Tanks and tank destroyers were placed on side streets to poke around corners. They provided fire support while infantry cleared anti-tank emplacements and strongpoints. The fighting was less a sweeping military operation and more a series of desperate, localized brawls. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel advocated fiercely for avoiding the streets. He ordered his men to blast their way through buildings. The close-quarters combat was brutal. The Karl-Friedhof Cemetery, a site of Catholic graves, became a focal point of intense, deadly fighting. This resulted in significant American casualties. These included a platoon leader killed and Captain Weeks mortally wounded. The infantry's grim task was systematic clearance. Every house, every room, and every cellar had to be secured. In the congested apartment buildings, the fighting was often hand-to-hand. Soldiers employed bazookas, rifle grenades, and flamethrowers. They used these weapons to blast holes through walls and seal passageways. The psychological toll of this fighting was immense. The air was thick with dust, haze, and the coppery stench of blood, and his smell mingled relentlessly with the gunpowder. Amidst the chaos, surreal moments of peace sometimes occurred. The sound of birds singing contrasted sharply with the grim reality of the battle. Oberst Gerhard Wilk, the city commandant, operated from the Palast Hotel Quellenhof lobby. He received increasingly fanatical orders from Field Marshal Model to fight to the last man. Wilk was a professional soldier of 28 years. Internally, he was acutely aware of the military futility of the situation. He repeatedly requested permission to break out of the encirclement. He cited the exhaustion of ammunition, food, and water among his troops. He also noted the complete disintegration of his command structure. All of his requests were strictly denied. The German defense was now driven purely by suicidal political dogma. The final American assault successfully broke the remaining German lines. General Clifton Andrus authorized the use of the 155mm self-propelled gun. This powerful weapon was used to fire directly through windows. It proved instrumental in blowing holes through the fortified German houses. The car house and the Hotel Quellenhof were soon captured. The Hotel Quellenhof had been the very symbol of the doomed German command. Its main lobby quickly became a maelstrom of discarded clothing, weapons, food, and broken furniture. On October 21, 1944, the inevitable arrived. Oberst Wilk's situation was truly desperate. His remaining 1,200 men had just consumed their last hot rations. American prisoners of war, Hewitt M. Paget and James B. Haswell, embarked on a dangerous mission. They carried a white flag to signal the German surrender. Wilk and his staff soon emerged from their bunker. He addressed his troops, explaining his decision. He acknowledged that he had acted against orders to fight to the last man. He believed further resistance was completely pointless. Colonel Seitz reported the official end of hostilities at 4:15 p.m. Aachen became the first major German city captured by the Allies. It was a wasteland of torn walls, shattered glass, bodies, and bloodstains. Its capture provided a significant propaganda victory. Its victory was boosted by President Roosevelt's words on sacrifice for freedom. Aachen symbolized the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany on the Western Front. The reality of the campaign, however, irrevocably altered the timetable for the war. The 5-week grinding struggle cost the 30th Infantry Division alone over 3,000 casualties. The 1st Infantry Division suffered thousands more. This heavy price debunked the myth of a swift victory that had been fostered after the liberation of Paris. The Battle of Aachen provided crucial, if costly, lessons in complex urban warfare. Ultimately, it underscored the immense human price required to breach Germany's final frontier. During his interrogation, Oberst Wilk was disillusioned and broken. He broke into tears, revealing the psychological collapse of the German command structure. In 1907, this collapse occurred under the pressure of overwhelming Allied force. Years later, a new narrative would emerge within Germany. The Suspect New View was led by historians like Dr. Peter M. Quadflieg. For these historians, the surrender of Aachen was not simply a military defeat. They saw it as a liberation from the fanatical Nazi dictatorship. Aachen marked the true, painful beginning of a new German future. If you value these historical accounts, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps us preserve these stories. And please, share your own memories or thoughts in the comments below.